Okay. Today is July 12th, 2013. My name is Cheryl Walker. I am with the Illinois State Library. I am at the Prairie Capital Convention Center in Springfield, Illinois. I will be interviewing Mr. Jerome Matuch. Mr. Matuch was born in Chicago, Illinois on September 7th, 1937. Jade Ledbetter is the Illinois court reporter who will be transcribing Mr. Matuch's interview today. Mr. Matuch, for the record, could you tell us what branch of service and what your highest rank was?
My branch of service was the United States Army, and my highest rank was a Specialist 4th class.
Would you like to share your story with us about your time in the service?
Yes, I would. I was 23 years old. It was an election year between Nixon and Kennedy, and I got a letter in the middle of November of 1960, and it stated to report to the induction center, which I still have that paper, on December 2nd, 1960, to the induction center, and told me to leave my car home and just come as you are. Don't bring any fancy clothes. And when I reported there, I went to the complete physical and took that great step forward that made me into the Army at the time. So that was it. From there, we were, and many other men, mainly drafted men, were taken by bus to the Illinois Central Station, which is not there in Chicago anymore, boarded a Illinois Central train that went all the way through Illinois to Missouri, to St. Louis, and to a place called Rolla, Missouri, and it was Fort Leonard Wood, which is still there today. That's where I would start my Army career, in basic training. I spent the whole winter, December, January, part of February there, and completed basic training, as they call it in the Army. When we graduated with a parade and music and stuff, and I didn't know what was going on. I got orders to report to St. Louis, and a bunch of us flew by plane from St. Louis Airport to a place called El Paso, Texas, where I'd spend the next 8 weeks at a place called Fort Bliss, Texas, which is still there. It's right on the border of El Paso and Mexico. So for the weeks there at Fort Bliss, we were the first unit, and I was the first one with the unit to be trained on the Hawk guided missile program. The Hawk guided missile is the low altitude plane that would shoot down low aircraft planes at treetop level, they call them. And at the time, this country was in emergency, and it was part of the Nike Hercules and Nike Ajax, which was being trained down there. And a lot of these stations were around Chicago and different cities, you know, waiting for an attack from Russia, as they call it. I was trained as a fire control operator, which means I actually set up and checked out with radar technicians the radars we ran, the cables, power cables, data cables to the, it was where I worked mainly when this was all set up was a battery control central. It was mounted on the back of a truck, and it consisted of 4 radar screens like the air controllers really use now, the radar. So my job was to search and lock on targets and eventually shoot them down. I never did that during my tenure in the Army because it was the Cold War at the time. And after 8 weeks, we got our orders. And a little thing about this, I always make a joke about it. Maybe I wouldn't be around anymore. Is there were two different places that we were supposed to go. One was Hawaii, the other one was Germany. I wound up with the bunch in Germany. So if I was in Hawaii, this was 1961, and Vietnam was just heating up then. So I got my orders there. They put us on a plane at El Paso Airport and flew us to a place called Fort Dix, New Jersey, right outside of New York City. Spent a week there waiting to be embarked on a ship, and it was an old ship from World War II. They call a Liberty ship. It was a troop ship, and we sailed out of New York Harbor, and it was for 7 days on the North Atlantic Ocean. And I'm not sure. Our orders were to go to Germany, okay, but on the way there, we neared England, the coast of England, and we actually docked at Southampton, England. And what surprised me, I never seen a big ocean liner, but the Queen Mary was docked right beside us at the time. If you remember the pleasure cruises of the 1950s. There, people would get off, mostly military personnel, and I don't know how long it took then, but when it was ready, they docked us out of there, and we went through the English Channel to a place called Bremerhaven, Germany. It's the northernest part of Germany. So they had a bland plane from us for the U.S. Army as we unboarded there and got aboard a train. And what I liked about the train was that this time you had all diesel locomotives in the United States, but this was a steam engine train. It was like the good days like I used to see as a kid. I traveled with a bunch of other guys to a place called Schweinfurt, Germany. It's in the central part of Germany, and it was 8 miles away from the east border. The east border was the dividing line between the Russians and the Americans, and English and French, as you know, back then. I set up in billets over there, and learned later that the billets they had, the bill housing and all that, was used by the German troops during World War II, and this is 20, 30 years later. So we each had a room. There was about 4 or 5 of us to a room, and that's how it would be for the next 16 months. My regular tour duty there it started off pretty good, but we had a work schedule, and they divided our battery into 2 groups. One would be 24 hours on, like from 8 o'clock. It was 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock the next morning, and that was out at a missile site. This was out in the field. We weren't in any tents. We were in a regular, they call them Quonset huts, but it was nice anyway. Not in the cold weather, it was bad, really. All you had is a little coal stove heating the place up. So there I would perform, when I was on duty, guard duty, which would be 2 hours on, 4 hours off during the day and night. And whenever we would go on alerts, we'd have to check our equipment out, the radars. And the thing that started happening when I was over there in 1961, it was in August, they started building the Berlin Wall. So what happened, we got into alerts, and once a month, no matter if it's Saturday, Sunday, if you were on leave or something, we would go on an alert, and you didn't know if it was the real thing. We had to go out in the field for almost 24 hours and then return to our barracks and stuff like that. So it was sort of a nerve-wracking thing. I went in without the high blood pressure, but I came out with it. And the time spent there was nice. The town of Schweinfurt, if some people would remember during World War II, was they'd call it bomb to hell from the United States because of a factory that made ball bearings for the war effort. That factory was still there, and that was it. I spent most 16 months there. I went on leave to places like Berchtesgaden and Germany. It's on a leave. It was a religious leave, but it was a nice thing. You know, I enjoyed the time off and all that. We would travel all over Europe displaying our missiles. The most important thing, not important thing, but fascinating thing is we had to take a unit of ours and we spent a weekend, but we didn't have to have any fun. It was in Paris, France, to show the French government our weapons and how to use them. So that's about it with my career. It was 16 months and about half a month there. I got out in November of 1962, but that was not the end of the Army career. I don't know how it is right now, but we had to serve 4 years in the reserve. So I was in during the Vietnam era, but they never called me there because, well, I got married a year after I got out of the service. And at the time, they weren't taking guys that were married, even though you were in the service. So that's about it.
Okay, Mr. Matuch, when you went into the service, when you were drafted,
Yep.
when you got your draft notice,
Yes.
did you know what your MOS was going to be? Did they ask you?
No.
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 Okay.
Come to think of it, I went with guys that were in my outfit in basic training. 2 of them I know of, and I can't even locate them now. Maybe something happened. But anyhow, their MOS at the time, this was 1961, and they were given orders to be advisors in Vietnam as teletype operators, if you remember what a teletype is. So we were just all over. The outfit I was with in Germany, most of the guys were from the Midwest. I know a few of them from Detroit, a few from Minnesota. One of the men from Michigan was right near a place where my mother grew up, and they knew that my family, my mother's family. So he was a farmer, and there was another farmer there, and they were allowed to bring the wife over there when they were in service in Germany. They had housing outside, and they had an allowance for food and, well, even liquor, cigarettes at the time. At the time, I don't know if they'd still do that. I know for the 16 months I was there, they had a ration on cigarettes. You were given coupons for 4 cartons a month. And the reason being, you could sell that stuff called black market. The German people, didn't matter if they were German, would pay high prices, and cigarettes were very expensive back then. So even the meat, but the meat and groceries were mostly for the married couples that were over there. So I know one sergeant of mine, I still can't understand. Well, he made a career of the Army over there, and he was a Hawaiian. But what he did when he retired, he got married to some German girl. The father gave them a piece of land in Germany, and I don't know if he's still living out there. I remember going to a big thing of theirs. They had a big dinner, and it wasn't nothing military. He invited most of the guys from our outfit, and was like a roast pig dinner with all the free wine and stuff and all that. So it was nice to be out there at times. And it wasn't all work with the Army. on our time off, I was part of like a football team there against the other batteries. Baseball, we had bowling, you name it. And at the time, it's not like today. You got a computer, you can cell phone. I only could be a lot. Well, it was a little expensive. The phone call landline once a month, and you had to call a 7 hour difference between Germany and Chicago, where my parents lived. So
Did you write home a lot?
yes, I did. I'd say every couple of weeks. I'd even send stuff home. My mother was into collecting crystal, and in Germany they were making it was pretty reasonable. I used to pack that stuff and send different. I still have a set of six of tapestries. They're country scenes of horses and deer that I keep under wraps real good. I like them, and some once in a while I hang them up like on the wall as a display. So
Uh, when you were in Germany and you lived on post, did you have a car?
no, there was no car. I had to leave the car with my brother, and it was still running when I got out 2 years later, and it was old, almost a 10-year-old Chevy. So
How did you travel through Germany? Did you take a bus or?
mostly the time when I was saying going down to Berchtesgaden, Austria, was by train. That's the only time. Anyhow, we had a lot of travels to do, but it was with trucks, convoys, and stuff like that. We had to go pick up our missiles, supplies to different parts of Germany. So I had a what they call a 2.5 ton truck. It was called a deuce and a half. I got a picture of that even at home, and I was part of the convoy that followed the commander in a jeep with another guy, and my one of my trails was a generator which operated our missile system, and I was an operator of that. I had to go to school for that, how to learn how to run one of them things, and I even got my driver's license as being in the service. I still got that. Doesn't have a picture on it, but it states what I'm trained to drive. So trucks were the only thing I remember driving. That's all. I never had a car. Some of the guys, most of the officers had cars, or somebody that was really into the service, making a career of it. A lot of the sergeants, the non-commissioned officers, they were older men when I got over there. I was only 23. These guys were 40, almost having their service, but most of them were from the Korean conflict, and a couple of them, and I sort of wonder if they ever lived any longer because, well, one guy used to make a noise behind his back and he'd jump. It was considered post-traumatic syndrome back then, but it was called shell shock because he was in Korea battle. This was 10 years after Korea. So
So, did you actually see the Berlin Wall being built?
no, no, the only time I got to see something like that is one of our missile batteries. There were A, B, C, D missile batteries. Each consisted of 36 missiles in each battery there. And one of them was in a town, it's a German name. I'm glad I didn't wind up there because it wasn't like in a valley. It was a town called Wildflecken, and it was hardly a block long town. Looked like something out of the country. But you could see part of the wall there. And this was about 50 miles from Berlin. So this whole thing goes down through, it went all really that almost to Italy at the time. I was hoping while my time in the service there, I would have got to visit Slovakia or Poland, but they were under communist rule, and the military personnel weren't allowed to visit that because we could get captured and become an incident.
You talked about going across the ocean in a Liberty boat.
Mhm.
Can you explain what a Liberty boat is?
Well, these boats were built. They were like regular steamships built during the World War II, and this was one of them. The name of it was General Alexander Patch, and it was named after a general that was part of the military in the Korean conflict. And each ship had a name like that. And it was mostly to carry troops. I figured how many they turned out in a few days of them things, but it was an experience I'd never been through. I thought it would be okay, but you got out about 4 hours out of the port. This was 7-day journey, and all you could see is water. Then I was in the lower part of the ship, and I must have had that much to sleep in. You know, you had to crawl in like sailors do. And the thing was, you get into the sea, it rolls. It might go up and down real slowly, and and the guys were getting sick. I got to the point where if I laid down, it was okay, but some of the other guys, it was, heaving and everything for a while.
Were they bunks that you were in? Or
Yeah, they were like hammocks with springs on the bottom, and you almost just had that much. You had to pull yourself and flip in there. And I had everybody that was in the service had to take a sort of a tour of duty of the ship, and there was a supply area there. I had to make sure the doors were closed, and it was for 2 hours. You could hear the pounding of and rolling.
So that was a long 7-day trip.
Yeah. As we neared England, I was surprised. I came on board. It was a nice day, and what happened is, I don't know if they did that with all the American ships that were coming into England, but the British Air Force would come and buzz us right along the deck there. That was a lot of fun watching that.
Now, how long were you in England?
We were only one day there because they had personnel that were going to England, military personnel, and that was it. Another thing about the ship is the lower part, I'm not sure, there was an upper section where the family of the people would stay, the women and children. See, they weren't mingled with the military, so there was a certain thing you had to obey there. I think it worked out okay. So.
Now, how did you get across? What kind of vessel did you get across the English Channel on?
That was the same ship.
The Liberty
Yeah.
vessel.
It actually, they had tugboats pull it out of that Southampton dock, and then we continued. And I always heard about the White Cliffs of Dover, but it was a clear day when we went by them, and that actually had white cliffs on the Dover on England there.
Really?
Really.
Wow. So did it take you just one day to get across the English Channel?
That wasn't long to go, no. As we neared the port of Bremerhaven, it's called, you had tugboats come in, and the ship just stopped, and they just pulled it into the dock there, and there's a railroad runs right by the dock there, and everybody boarded that, and you got off at where you're supposed to get off according to the orders. So
Interesting.
the interesting thing about this whole thing I didn't mention is twice I was able to come back to the United States. The reason being, our missile system was not allowed to practice in Germany. The reason being, we could cause a World War III if something would go over that side there. These missiles would go about 25 miles, and they'd explode over enemy targets, planes. See, we had to travel all the way from Germany by plane. It was in Frankfurt, Germany. We boarded an Air Force plane and went all the way back to El Paso, Texas, to Fort Bliss to practice fire at, they call them drones, radio-controlled planes out in the White Sands Missile Range is where this took place. So
And you did this twice.
twice. They sent a whole unit of us over there. And on the way back, one of the times was 19, yes, Christmas time of 61. I told them I wanted to go home for a week or so, and they okayed it. And just by giving me papers with orders, I went home. The whole outfit went back, and I spent the time at home. And at the time, I don't know if the military still can do this, but they call it catch a hop. I was driven to O'Hare Airport. The Air Force had a certain section there. You showed them that orders. They flew you from there to New Jersey. Then a plane went all the way over to Frankfurt, Germany, and I caught a train to Schweinfurt. It didn't cost me a penny all the time there.
Oh.
And I heard about taking the hop business, but I thought it was guys kidding around. But it worked out real good.
Now, this was when you did catch a hop, were you in your military uniform?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how we were told to travel when we did have that, and had our orders, make sure our orders were with us all the time. So.
And did you go into military airports or bases?
No, this was a part, I don't know if O'Hare still has a military section. It used to have, the Air Force was on the north end of it, I remember. I don't know if that's still there right now. So.
Okay, so you were in the service between 60 and 62, and this was during the Cold War. How was the welcome during the time that you came home?
There was nothing like it is right now. I notice every time somebody comes home from Afghanistan, and I don't blame them for what the hell they go through in there as far as the bombings and all that. When I came home, that was another thing. My original orders stated I was supposed to come back by ship, the same way I came through the channel across the ocean to New York. But that was changed at the last moment. It was due to the Cuban Missile Crisis stuff. This was November of 62, just not even a few weeks after the crisis. And what was happening, the ship was being actually loaded with supplies to go fight in Cuba, I learned later. And I'm learning a little bit now and then that we were close to World War III because there were American and Russian submarines poised to hit the button down there near Cuba when they had that blockade of the ships. So we came back by plane, and the time difference, it really makes a difference. You're almost sleeping most of the way, and then when it lands, we landed at it wasn't JFK Airport at the time, but it was in New York. We were bused from New York to Brooklyn. It's a place called Fort Hamilton. At the time in 62 was a chaplain post where they taught anybody with the religions to be a chaplain in the services. So in there I was a few days, and we finally got our DD 214, which is our discharge notice. They gave us so much money to travel from New York to Chicago. They said we could go by plane, but we would have had to use the whole money. But what I did was I wanted to see part of the country, so I got on a Trailways bus. I don't think they're still in business anymore, in New York, and traveled through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Chicago. When I got off the bus, I mean, there was no cheering or anything like that. I took a cab home. Everybody welcomed me from the family and neighborhood, but that was it. Next day, go to work or so find a job. That's how it was back then with all the guys that were drafted or in the service.
Did you, when you came home, did you have a job waiting for you?
No, I didn't. No. It seemed like where I lived in Chicago, there was a grocery store, right, one of them mom and pop places across from me, and we knew them real well for 20, 30 years. And they knew somebody that worked in a medical outfit down near County Hospital, a supply house. So I wound up getting a job there. Like it was mostly picking orders and driving with the delivery guys to medical supplies to the Chicago hospitals at the time there. And I met my wife there. So, and then that when we got married, I was still working there, but then her father worked with General Motors, and this was in Willow Springs, Illinois, and it was in September of 64 that I got a job there, which I worked till I almost had 38 years in with them. The GM plant was similar to well, you'd call it a parts place. I operated what they call a welding machine that welded like the basic door sections, and the whole plant operated the same way with floor pans. They call them deck lids, hoods, and stuff like that. And it was sent to another plant where they would paint and assemble that. So that lasted till 1989. They closed plants in 89 or 86. They told us our plant is closing. When I finished there in 89, it was I had 25 years in. So I belong with the United Auto Workers, the union, and a bunch of us got to go to another parts plant. There was 50 of us with high seniority. But 300, 400, 500, 600 people I never saw again. They were distributed different plants down to Louisiana, Pennsylvania, Upper Michigan. So what I did learn is how to, with helping people, what I'm doing now with the American Legion is before our closing, I was part of a union, and one other man was part of a skilled trades operation with two other people that were management, and we had what they call a dislocated workers program, trying to find people jobs. And I never worked in an office before, but we all set up an office like that, had training by a psychiatrist and all that, and went through a lot of just training to try to help the people find a job and tried to dispel, they were starting to have suicides because they lost their job, lost their home. It was pretty bad. There was about 6 plants in the 80s that they closed. So that's about my life. I retired in 2001, so I've just been enjoying it for the last 13 years. So.
Did you stay in touch with anyone from your unit?
For a few years afterwards, I was able to. One in particular, a guy in the same room, he worked with the FBI. he used to tell us stories. He was in records and investigation or something about at the movie stars at the time, what records they kept on him. So as far as the other ones, I sort of lost touch with them, and right now, but I'm in touch by being online. They're called Missiles of Key West. And what that means is the time I was in, the same kind of a unit was stationed down in Florida, all the way to the Panama Canal, and they were set up with the same kind of missiles like mine. So I haven't had a chance. They have a reunion every year in DC and get a trip like honor flight, but they have to pay for their own booking and all that. But I talked to them guys on there, what they did and all that. And most of them I can't find anybody from my time period yet. These guys actually went to the middle 80s in this unit. and I think there's still Hawk missiles out there now. The one that uh, replaced the Hawk missile is the Patriot. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It looks like a long square tube, and they shoot out of that, and it's real complicated.
When you were in Germany and stationed there, did you have any entertainers come over and entertain you?
Yes, our barracks were called Leadward Barracks. You could look them up. There's a site of, it's called Army Kasernes. Kasernes mean barracks in German. And there's a whole list of them in Germany. And guys actually put on pictures or stories. It's called Old Soldiers. It's on the Facebook, I know. So, and what was the question you asked about?
Did you have any entertainers?
Oh, yes. Our barracks had a regular, it was like a nightclub atmosphere thing. They had actually one-armed bandits there. You could gamble, and every week there was a different entertainment. Most of them were German groups trying to imitate the favorites of the time of the United States in that time period. But once in a while, we would have somebody from country and western songs at the time. Hank Snow was one of them, I know. And the one I just missed maybe by 6 months of, he was about 10 miles away from my unit, was Elvis Presley. He was in the unit in the tanks over there.
So he was stationed over in that area with
Yeah.
you? Or at the same
when
time?
you look at uniform is like mine.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. So you could have brushed elbows with him.
Almost. A lot of guys tell you they met him and all that over there, and just like regular guy.
Oh, wow. Is there anything else you would like to, you say that you got the Good Conduct Medal.
There's another one. It's a peacetime, just a freedom medal, but that's the only two I got because I didn't do anything as far as no medal for Purple Heart or anything like that. But the thing is, they're awarding a medal now. I get that medal magazine, and there's one for participating in NATO, and it says anytime from 1945 to present almost. I was part of NATO at the time this was going on, so I don't know. I got my medals for free, and it was not after my time. It was in the middle 80s because I found it in a magazine, a weekly magazine of the Chicago paper, and it was a place to write. And when I got that, I got the ribbon and the medal from the service. So,
is there?
Could I mention something about my brother being in at the same period of time almost?
Yes, yes.
Okay, his name is Frank, and he was drafted. He was drafted in the middle of the Vietnam in '67. But instead of sending him to Vietnam, they sent him to Korea, right on the 38th, and he was at the 38. He talks about it now and then. But anyhow, you ask me how things were coming home. I always like to give this story because I believe in what he said. When he got discharged, he came in through Midway Airport in Chicago, and he was just about to leave. And at that time in '69, you know how things were with hecklers and stuff. The guy was never in Korea, but they were hollering baby killer to him. You know how the GI got that stigma, killing men and women and children at the time. But he almost started a fight. The police had to hold him back, he said, but he didn't get into trouble. But it's just the idea how people were against the GI 30, 40 years ago.
there anything else that you would like to share?
No, it was an experience. I didn't know how I was going to act when I first got in there. Was a little nervous at the time, but it seemed to work out, and I enjoyed it after getting set it up into something. I didn't think I'd be into something like I was, being trained on radars and working with technicians. The most of the technicians were college graduates, and they worked in the field with the company that built the missiles was Raytheon. I think they're still in business out east somewhere, but I made friends with them, and one time they went home on leave. I went with them and all that, and in Reading, Pennsylvania, and got to meet their families and all that. So it was an experience.
Well, I know that you're a member of the American Legion. Are you also a member of any other veteran organizations?
No, see, I cannot belong to like the VFW only says you have to be if you were in war area. See, my brother he's a member of the VFW, but he's in Korea where they had war at I don't know what you'd call it, but during the Vietnam time where he's considered a veteran. But this is the only one I've ever belonged to, and I just joined it while I was still working. And then in 2001, when I retired my job, the day afterwards, I went to a meeting and they made me service officer, and I've been that way ever since. I'm sort of like this job, and I've kept up with it. They keep every year you change personnel in that position, but I sort of liked it because the first 3, 4 years, and not lately, but I used to get calls from guys at home that were sick or something, and I'd go over there and bring them flowers and stuff, and the wife and the man would be really gracious to me and say, well, you're the first one, no relatives visited me in 4 or 5 years. Thanks for coming. I'd sit there for an hour, talk with them, and I do that to the hospital when they're in the hospital. There's 2 of them now in our hospital in Hines. One of them's a Vietnam veteran, another one's from the Navy in Korea. So, and the guy actually works at Hines there, him and his wife. So he had heart trouble, and I guess he's getting some valve treatment. So I go there, and I've got a list of about 35 names of our members, and every time something happens, I'm the chaplain too. I get calls. I'm sort of on a calling list from the different funeral homes around my area, and they let me know. They question people if they were a member of the Legion, and we get to say what's a post everlasting, a funeral service, which lasts about 10 minutes or so. And for the last 10 years, it sounds bad, but I go to about 30 of these a year almost. It's averaging guys dying from Korea and World War II. So, and sometimes when we're at a funeral home, they might have another person that was a veteran but not a Legionnaire, and the family every once in a while comes over and asks us to give a service, and we do. We just change the name Legionnaire to veteran, and we do it. And so no charge or anything. So.
Well, at this time, I would like to thank you for serving our country. And I would also like to thank you for honoring me with the ability to interview you today. Thank you.
Thank you.